All right. Maybe that was a lot easier than I thought.
Yeah, I'm seeing this meeting is being recorded, and then I guess I gotta press got it. All right. But once you turn it off, and then when we actually launched it.
Like the kind of explosion of other information, other data, like muddies the waters, or do you kind of see like a clean core fundamental, technology or value proposition in there? Because it just the noise is so high now, and it was great when I was just subscribing to your newsletter, right? Or this channel, but then there's 55 more of those even.
Yeah, yeah. I follow some of those other things, right? And there's a really nice feature of Google Chrome. At least I have it turned on my phone, where it presents you when you open a new tab. It presents you with maybe 20 things that you think you might be interested in, right?
Yeah.
And if you train it right, like don't ever click on kitten videos or something like that, right? But only click on stuff you're interested in, like AI, right? It actually gets really good at putting up every day or a couple times a day things you might be interested in if you're tracking AI machine learning. And then I track, I subscribe to some newsletters. There's some YouTube feeds, that I do, and X, aka Twitter, is actually pretty useful too. I follow a bunch of people on there because then they kind of are a big filter. They'll put things forward, that stuff you might. But then, I mean, it's practically my job lately, right? So I scan a lot of stuff every day. It's a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
And I try to figure out what's important, what's noise, and what's going to make a difference long term. And then I don't want to just blast the investing disruption list with 10 things every day, right? So I try to be really picky, given the audience, that try to put relevant stuff up. So
We sure appreciate it. So thanks.
yeah, I'm doing it anyway. So yeah, I'm happy to do it, right? So I do it for myself. So I'd still be doing all that even if it wasn't for investing in disruption, right? So I'm happy to share chicken. So why don't we get started then? I think most people know who I am. I'll just give a brief introduction to myself. I've been doing AI for quite a long time. It's transitioned over the decades, right? It started with machine learning, and my background is evolutionary computation, that form of machine learning. I've done a number of startups over the years, so it's 7, depending on how you count them. It's some of them successful. They've all had their successes. Some more successful than others, right? And I've been impacted by the AI transition, right? Um, there was a time in early 2020, I had sold my last startup, Feature X, and I was thinking about transitioning to something else, right? This is before the pandemic hit. I thought that I might want to, be the person who created the first AGI, right? And so I did some back of the envelope calculations about how much money I would need to raise in order to have a run at creating the first AGI, and I came up with $8 billion, as a seed round, right? And I would have to move to California. There's no way I'm going to pull something like that off in Boston, right? And as I was contemplating that, I had another awareness that, wait a second, are we in a global pandemic, right? And COVID hit, and that put the brakes on everything, right? And by the way, that $8 billion in hindsight now, now that we're like 3 years later, almost 4 years later, it would not have been enough, right? OpenAI to date has raised $13 billion, and it's debatable whether they've already created an AGI or not. We can talk about that, but it takes big bucks to play in that game, right? So I want to introduce Dan too. We're both in Walnut Ventures, or we were, right? But going back quite a ways, I had developed some new machine learning technology. Built a hammer basically that could potentially hit lots of nails, and I was wondering what to do with it, what startup to form. And I had this idea that what I would do is I would invite members from Walnut Angel Group and others, some from other angel groups like Launchpad, and we would all get together at Babson College, and and I would make a presentation, and we'd hash out what we should, what could be done with this technology, right? it was kind of an experiment because people had to show up physically, right? Zoom didn't exist in those days, right? So, and I was really kind of shocked and honored how many people showed up to that, right? So I didn't get a count, but it was something like 30. It's Michael, you were there. Do you remember about how many people showed up for that?
30's probably a good
Yeah, about
guess.
right. Yeah. Anyway, there's this fun discussion, after the presentation, lots of ideas kicked around. Then there's this one guy, who started asking really pointed technical questions, right? So, and just he wouldn't stop. He kept drilling down and drilling down, and I finally had to say to him, like, said, look, if we're going to proceed any further, you have to sign an NDA, right? So, and that was Dan. I may have met Dan before, but I hadn't really gotten to know him. And so that was, and then we got together for lunch afterwards, and we got to know each other. That's over the years, right? So anyway, so Dan, why don't I turn it over to you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yeah, I was introduced to machine learning quite early. I was studying physics and math at Princeton and met John Conway, who was the inventor of the game of life. And so discovered cellular autonoma as a teenager, and used gradient descent and built models for prediction and simulation very early. Took that to JP Morgan and worked on asset management in the finance industry, doing predictive analytics for the buy side. And then for a hedge fund for 9 years, I ran a computational commodity fund and global macro equity fund, two global macro equity funds that used fundamental data and machine learning to predict fundamental value and make relative value investment decisions in public stock markets. At the same time, I had a parallel career building software startups. I've now been part of the founding team for 14 different software startups over the last 27 years, and had some good exits and some failures, learned a lot along the way. I started angel investing in 2006, was a co-founder at Beacon Angels and then a member at Walnut Ventures. Started venture investing with startups because my favorite part of all of this is the 0 to 1 process. And I really enjoy helping founders navigate those early days. It's the most difficult time when the value add is the greatest, the uncertainty and the risks are the greatest, and the leverage of the early team is the greatest. And now I run a venture fund called Broom Ventures, and we make investments in early stage software businesses, primarily B2B SaaS businesses, but also straying outside of that. I also manage assets in public markets, a little over 100 million altogether. Things have been changing a lot in the last few years, and Gil and I have been continuously chatting about the future, and so I'm glad to be here to share perspectives and also to learn more from all of you. So happy to be here.
All right, thanks, Dan. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and introduce some terms. I mean, we're going to talk about AI and then AI oriented investing, and then we can talk about some other things too, like AGI and how that's going to impact all our lives and so on, depending on how much time and interest we have, right? So I also want to say from the outset, this is kind of a free for all. Don't feel like you have to raise your hand to talk. You just jump in whenever you have something to say. It's just basically an open discussion at this point. So we're going to talk about AI, right? AI has a long history, right? And that entire history basically has been wiped out, right, as being almost insignificant now compared to first deep learning and now transformers, right? So when we talk about AI today, like ChatGPT and a lot of the things that are coming out, It's all been developed in just the last few years, right? So it's weird to say, especially since I have a lifetime history in working on AI, that almost all of previous AI has become insignificant compared to deep learning and transformers. So in the context of investing today, it's that latter AI, that we really want to focus on, right? So we're going to use the term AGI, stands for Artificial General Intelligence. So I think Dan and I have different views on that. So, my view is I just think of AGI, say AGI version 1 as a computer system that is as capable as humans in most regards, right? Maybe not the physical, robots are coming, but they're not here yet. But in terms of being online and being an intelligent entity, AGI 1 is human equivalent in virtually all regards. All right, so that's AGI 1. AGI 2 then is twice as capable, and so on and so on. All right, so there's artificial superintelligence, right? So you can think of that as AGI N, where the N gets bigger and bigger, right? So superintelligence, will basically be AI that grows beyond all human comprehension. You can imagine a machine that is 1,000,000 times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than a human, right? So that's superintelligence. GPT-4, I think we're probably familiar with. That's part of OpenAI's Chat GPT. GPT-4 right now is the most advanced AI that's been released to the public, right? So I think that might be about to change with Google's Gemini, but they haven't released it yet, right? So to put GPT-4 into perspective with respect to, let's say, humans, right? So GPT-4 was trained on text. It was actually now, it's become evident it's also trained on images, because Chat GPT can now listen, understand images, and speak, right? So that's just rolling out now, besides just the text interface, right? So, but GPT-4 was trained on text straight from the internet. Some internal details have leaked, because OpenAI is not talking about it. So, and it's not entirely clear how accurate this is, but knowledgeable people think it's a pretty reliable leak. They think that GPT-4 was trained on 13 trillion tokens, right? So a token is like a piece of a word. If you do the word equivalent of tokens, GPT-4 was trained on roughly 10 trillion words. I'm sorry, 10 trillion words. Well, that's a lot of words, right? So if you take a human who's a voracious reader, and over their lifetimes, how many words have they actually read? Estimates are, about 5 billion, right? So 5 billion versus 10 trillion, right? So the knowledge base of GPT-4, is already superhuman. Far exceeds the knowledge of any single person, right? So what it does with that knowledge is, something is open to debate and so on. But so that's GPT-4. In creating systems like GPT-4, you need to train them, and then you need to use them, right? So the training is done once, and it's a massive computational task, right? It's been, part of it comes from OpenAI. OpenAI partnered with Microsoft, and used their computing servers. They spent $100 million in training costs to train GPT-4, right? So it's estimated that in that training, the servers did 21 septillion floating point operations, right? So that's a 21 with 24 zeros behind it, floating point operations. That's a huge...
Cool question. Do you see transformers providing a potential pathway to AGI, or as powerful as it becomes and as much horsepower as it picks up, is it not going to get where that goes eventually, do you think?
Let me finish the definitions and then we can talk about that, because that's an important question, right? So So training is very expensive, right? Not too many companies or organizations can afford, $100 million to train a model, right? So the big models like GPT-4 are being done by big tech companies, right? So, and OpenAI would never have been able to pull it off without the partnership with Microsoft, right? Microsoft has now invested close to $13 billion, in OpenAI, right? So, and then there's inference, right? So that's using the model, right? So that's much, much less expensive. But you multiply that by the number of users that are using your system, right? So this is something that OpenAI struggles with GPT-4 and just the ordinary cheap free version of ChatGPT, right? Because they have to do a lot of computation, but it's significantly less, right? And we can talk about personal AI assistance and edge computation. Edge computation is all about inference, right, and the size of the models. So why are we even talking about AGI today, right? What's changed, right? So because a lot of people, including me, assume that AGI was a decade or more in the future. Some thought it was 100 years in the future, right? So and now today, it seems like potentially AGI is right around the corner, right? So and what changed is these large language models, right? So in developing large language models, so a large language model, the optimization task is you take a lot of text, you pick a snippet of that text, 100 words, 1,000 words, and then you train a system to predict the next word, right? That's fundamentally it, right? So to be successful at predicting the next word, you need two things. You need a pretty comprehensive model of the language that you're predicting the next word for, and you need a really comprehensive model of the world, because if you don't have that model of the world, you don't know what the language is referring to, right? So you need those two pieces, right? So in AI research going back decades, all the way up until about a year ago, right? So we didn't have a model of the world. We didn't know how to build a model of the world. You could build little pieces of model of the world, like a game or supply chain management or something like that. But the whole bloody thing, right, and all the complexity, not only physical things but more abstract things, theory and computer coding, and so on. We just simply didn't know how to build it. And with large language models, overnight, we got a model of the world for free. Okay, so the hardest part of building an AI system or an AGI system just happened overnight. Just dropped into humanity's lap, right? So that's one of the big changes that happened, right? So, and we can talk more about AGI, Scott, your question, right? So I also want to define alignment. So the alignment problem is if you create an AGI or super intelligence, how can you be sure that machine is aligned with the interests of humans, right? So because we're going down a path of building machines that are much, much smarter than we are. And it'd be really nice if they had our interests at heart, right? So because if you develop a machine that's 1,000 times smarter, 1,000,000 times smarter, and it goes off and does its own thing, just exactly what happens to humanity, right? So it's a serious problem. A lot of people are talking about it, right? So the kind of the founders, of the grandfathers, if you will, of deep learning, the technology that we're talking about today, there's three people, right? There's Jeff Hinton, there's Yoshua Bengio, and Jan LeCun, right? The first two are ringing the alarm bell, that we are potentially bringing about the end of the human race with this technology that we developed. Jeff Hinton, who's been working on this all his life, he said in interviews that he is potentially regretting his life's work based on the power of large language models and where it's going, right? So it's too much, too fast, and he doesn't see any way to control it. Jan LeCun, who heads up AI at Meta, he's basically taken the attitude, "Don't worry, be happy. It's all going to be fine." Right? So there you go. There's been a survey of machine learning researchers. 50% of them think there's a 10% chance, at least a 10% chance, that the outcome for humanity is going to be poor based on the technology path that we're currently on. Right, so that's the alignment problem. We can talk about what's happening there. It's like OpenAI is very, very concerned about that. Right, so I want to just mention foundation models too, because this is going to come up in investing. Foundation models are the big AI models like GPT-4. Very few companies or organizations, as I said, can build these things, and they hold them proprietary, right? But you can use them. You can use them in business, pay a fee, and so on. But you can't create them, right? They're too expensive to create, right? So in that sense, the world is kind of beholden to these big tech companies who are building these large foundation models, right? You can build smaller ones, and there's a lot of startups that are doing that, right? And we can talk about those AI startups that are building smaller versions, more limited versions of foundation models, and that's a potentially interesting area to invest in, right? So with regard to investing, switching over to that, let's start with angel investing and investing in private companies, right? So I personally am not investing in startups anymore because I don't think there's time for those startups to actually realize long-term value, right? And the reason for that is because I think AGI is potentially right around the corner, right? So I am personally living my life and organizing, my finances and living situation on the assumption that we only have about 2 years of more or less normal, day-to-day existence, like we have today, right? So that's 2024 and 2025. I think by 2025 or shortly thereafter, AGI will be out in the world, right? And everything really changes at that point. And once AGI is out, superintelligence is not that far behind. And we can talk about, how that happens, right? So from my personal perspective, it just seems too risky to, invest in any kind of private equity, right? Because the time frame is, my investing horizon for years has been 10 years, right? So it's shrunk down to a much smaller window at this point, right? So that pretty much excludes angel investing. Now, Dan, you're going just the opposite way with Broom, right? Because you're investing in lots of startups, right? And there's a bunch of angel investors here, so I'd love to hear from everybody about what their take is on doing angel investing.
I can speak a little bit to my position on angel investing. But before I dig down in that direction, I like to say I also like large cap, big tech stocks. You and I, Gil, have been long holders of Tesla and NVIDIA. I also hold Google and Apple, Meta, TSMC, AMD, and other companies that you might not expect, like Rio Tinto and video game companies like Take-Two Interactive. So I do think that the opportunities are very great for some of the large, big, companies that have already achieved scale, have distribution already solved, and can apply AI to dramatically reduce costs and improve their product suite. But there's a lot of opportunity in the private markets too. The public markets have been in a little bit of chaos as the Fed has increased rates and been quite hawkish. Real rates are now fairly high as the Fed continues to be hawkish while inflation has come down. And so that tightening of economic conditions has made for a difficult investment environment, because a lot of what we were seeing 2 years ago was essentially a zero interest rate phenomenon where the cost of capital was so low that a lot of things were being funded. So times have changed, and the cost of capital is no longer essentially free. There is now a risk premium, a discount rate for time. These things weren't there in September 21. So all right. So, but that said, the companies that we're seeing at the earliest stages. For them, this is go time. They are finding that they can move quickly, build solutions that large cap companies are not able to, or just are deciding not to do. They're not taking the risks, and small companies are finding these opportunities to employ new tooling and roll it out at enterprise scale and grow very quickly. It used to be that you kind of hope for revenue growth in a startup to look like 3x in the first year and then 2x for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that's still fine, but these days now you can see companies with 5x, 7x annual growth rates, where the constraints are lifting and the tooling is allowing companies to do a lot more with fewer people and faster. The open source components that allow companies to assemble functionality in ways that is designed for particular use cases, it's all coming together like Lego blocks, and you can just build the applications you need. The other part of this equation is that the economy is big and complicated. It's like a huge forest, and it may be that there are macro trends. It's definitely true that there are macro trends influencing how the whole works, but within this ecosystem, there are small, fast-growing opportunities that take advantage of new technologies in ways that large companies, just at least today, are not really doing. So I am investing in early stage companies. We tend to be very technically oriented, and so the companies that we work with tend to be exceptional from a technical perspective, but the opportunities seem like they are at least as attractive as they've ever been for me.
So Dan, let me ask you, I know, because we've done a lot of talking, that you also feel like we're in a very rapid run up to AGI, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know what your time window is, right? I've just put in a stake, next 2 years are going to be more or less normal, then things are going to really get disrupted, right? So how do you feel about that? And can you put that then in your investing context? Is there time, to get exits and realize value, given whatever the time frame is, towards severe disruption?
I think so. Yeah, everything moves a little slower than you sort of think of. It's like when you're imagining your drive on a long drive, you sort of skip all of the boring parts as you imagine your route, and then when you're actually in the car, it takes longer because reality is slower than our imaginations. I think that's happening here as well. The run up to AGI in terms of timeline for me feels like a question of definitions. I think we are already there. If you define AGI the way it was defined 10 years ago, we're already passing Turing tests. GPT-4, just a single instance of GPT-4 is already much better than most human authors at most tasks, passes exams better than most specialized students in particular domains. So I think we're essentially already there, and at least it depends on how you define AGI. And now people are using tools to compose more complex systems from LLMs at scale, where LLMs are interacting with each other under the surface and orchestrated by a higher level LLM that serves to ensure that the system is operating correctly. As you build more complex systems, adding LLMs at scale and adding memory through a vector database or any other way of adding external memory, I think that the cat's already out of the bag. We're basically, all the tools are in place, and now it's just a matter of people sort of realizing like the the Sagan quote that the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. I think that's largely true. I'm running the Hugging Face Code Llama 7B locally for inference on my own machine. And as I compose components to interact with themselves, interact with each other, it looks pretty smart to me. It's behaving in ways that I think 10 years ago that would have been AGI, and maybe today the definitions have shifted. We've moved the goalposts.
I'm wondering if, Gil, if you'd provide sort of what's your view of 2 years from now when there is AGI? Because I'm trying to think about where are the biggest impacts in society. Is it that, companies don't need accountants or, tax experts because it's all done in AGI, that no truck drivers are needed because now all the vehicles are automated? Teachers aren't needed because students just go into a computer. And it's sort of, that's like in the brain area. And then what about physical things? I mean, people still need to live in houses. They go to Starbucks. Sort of what are the biggest impacts and how is it sort of phased?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. I want to get to you in just a second, but I put Scott off in his question.
Okay.
So Scott, you want to ask what you were going to, I think we answered some of that already, but and it overlaps what Will is asking too. So.
No, I think you answered it because, I've heard other people sort of talk about that, transformer models will get us so far, but there's going to be another paradigm required to get us to AGI. It sounds like you guys think that we're either already there or we continue down this path and, we'll accomplish it. So I think you answered what I was asking earlier.
Okay, yeah. So there is a question. It's called scaling laws, right? So just taking a large language model and just making it bigger and bigger and bigger, are you going to get someplace, like AGI or superintelligence, right? So I have always assumed that you're not going to have big monolithic systems like a giant large language model, but you're going to have a number of interacting AIs, that as an ensemble will then become a superintelligence, right? So that's apparently already happened because some of the internals of GPT-4, if the leaks are correct, GPT-4 is not a monolithic system. It is 16 different AI systems interacting with one another, right? So each of those 16 modules, presumably has certain kinds of expertise, right? So and I think layered on top of that is actually a language model that they all share, right? In terms of training, right? So, so when you speak to GPT-4, there's the language model, but then there's 16 different AI systems that are listening, right? So and OpenAI has somehow, it's like a mixture of experts kind of thing, ensemble those together, to give it the smarts that it does, right?
So one quick add-on question then before I go back to mute is, so to what degree do you think it's possible that OpenAI is much further along than what's in the public domain right now? And then pretty much, they're testing, they're developing, holding back for whatever reason, but do you think they may already be there?
100%.
Yeah, 100%, exactly. I've listened to a lot of interviews from with the OpenAI people. Sam Altman for sure, and Ilya Sutskever, who's kind of the brains behind the whole thing, right? So, in terms of the technology, so and listening to what they say, it's pretty certain, that the technology they have, they're releasing at a very slow pace because they're allowing. Well, they're doing two things. They're allowing humanity to adjust to the fact that AI is here, right? And it's going to be profoundly transformative, right? So, the second thing is once AGI, my definition of AGI, machines that have agency in the world, right, and can run around and do stuff, right, form corporations and manufacture things, and it's not just answer questions on a chatbot. once that happens, and especially if you're using AGI, let's say AGI, 1, right? I think we're probably already past that, but some version of AGI, and you use it to design the next AGI, right? So you train a system that can create new AGIs, and then so now you have a more powerful one, and then you train that, and then it creates the next one that's even more powerful. It can be a runaway train, right? So before that happens, the OpenAI people have been very, very open about this, right? So you listen to Ilya Sutskever, who's one of the founders of OpenAI. He says we're going to roll this out, and we expect to make a lot of money. And he says we're not talking a small amount of money over the next and he was asked by his interviewer, how long are you talking about, right? And he says several years, right? So over the next several years, we could make $100 billion, $1 trillion, maybe even $100 trillion. I mean, he actually said $100 trillion, right? So and then in another interview, he's talking about the alignment problem and what OpenAI is doing about it, because they're really quite afraid of an unbounded superintelligence, right? So they realize the dangers there, and in talking about how much time they had to solve the alignment problem, again, the interviewer is very specific, and Sutskever says we have less than 4 years to solve this problem. Before superintelligence is on the planet, right? So very specific responses, right? So what I wish somebody had asked Ilya, is, all right, so let's say you make, $1 trillion, and a lot of that ends up in your pocket. What are you going to do with it, if money no longer means anything once there's a superintelligence on the planet, right? So I'd really like to know his answer to that, right? Because why bother, right? If it's all, money isn't even going to be a thing anymore in the future, right? So yeah, it's kind of a strange world we're living in right now. But I listen to this stuff, and these are really knowledgeable, intelligent people who are right on the cutting edge of what's happening right now, and they're saying these things, right? So you have to treat it as at least possibly being real.
So Gil, did you build a bunker on Block Island then?
I am not building a bunker, but we have just pulled the trigger on building another house out here next to our current one, right? So, those plans have been in the works for a bit, so it's not like I'm doing a knee-jerk reaction, to the impending apocalypse, but we are making a couple of changes to it. One is that it's going to be fully electric, right? So solar panels, batteries, we are going to have a well, right? So it can run off the grid. So to just back up a little bit, and answering your question, Will, the way I view things possibly going, and as Dan says, it could go slower, right? So it could easily go slower, right? So I mean, these things go on a hockey stick. Although it feels right now we've passed the knee of the hockey stick and we're in the upward run, right? So is that right now things are pretty much the same, right? AI agents are coming out. We're all going to have personal AI assistants, right? So we're going to be empowered by those assistants. We're all going to become more capable, right? So and that'll be a fairly rapid transition because as Dan and I have been pointing out, GPT-4 knows way more than any human being, right? So it can be really quite powerful. And then if you connect the GPT-4 to the internet, so its information will become more current, then you have a very, very powerful system, right? So
it's important to own that compute. There's a couple pieces that you can invest in. If you imagine an AI future where there's where there's an AGI that has autonomy, there's still going to be things that you want to own, and that includes a lot of the compute. There's edge compute for inference, and there's cloud compute for training. I think foundational models are still going to require massive data centers and lots of compute. So you want to feed that. And then for edge compute, I think you're going to want to run inference on every phone, on every computer. So all of these machines are going to need significant upgrades in performance. So there's a lot of economic activity to be had on the way. I think you also want to own the data supply chain, and particularly the earliest part of the data supply chain, where real world phenomenon enters into the digital realm at the beginning. After that, all the ETL businesses, all the intermediation businesses, those are likely to become under significant pressure. But there really isn't a good way to disintermediate the beginning of the data supply chain or the requirements on compute. So I'm trying to own those from an investment perspective. I think also you want to own the end user customer relationships, and the customers are going to be the ones who benefit the most from the run up to AGI. It's massively deflationary from a wage perspective as well. And Will, I think you were asking about what are humans going to do? And there's still a lot of physical work that needs to be done, but a lot of productive tasks today can be simply replaced. And so we're going to experience some social pain along the way, where we have to figure out how we're going to deal with the abundance. The productivity gains that come from AGI are going to roll through various industries and be deflationary, driving the costs dramatically down and enabling an era of abundance. But it is not clear to me how society responds to that. And it may be that abundance is well distributed and everybody's better off, or it may be that abundance is constrained in its distribution, and we're going to have to deal with unemployment and possibly something like a UBI to allow people to still have a means of survival when humans are no longer particularly valuable from an economic productivity perspective, and shift more toward a pure consumption model where they're just consuming and not necessarily adding economic value. And there's some sort of crazy psychological implications of this. How do you convince someone that it's a good idea to be educated? How do you motivate someone to feel like they should try, when the most they can ever hope to be is still less intelligent than their iPhone? So I'm not sure how society is going to react, but there are places where we can invest and set ourselves up through our assets to benefit from the run up, even if we're not sure how the abundance will eventually be distributed or how society will respond.
One quick naive question, and I should know this, but the partnership between Microsoft and OpenAI, does Microsoft have any sort of piece of this upside potential, or is it really just focused on Azure and more operational? Do you know?
Well, let me jump in here, Sec. I think Microsoft has a lot of potential. They have pretty broad rights to use OpenAI's technology, right? So it's really on them not to screw that up, right? So they've already kind of messed up, Bing Chat, right? It's they put weird restrictions on it. They force people to use the Edge browser to even access Bing Chat, and it's like. But they're doing a massive rollout in the Office ecosystem, right? And that's a big ecosystem. There's almost 2 billion people that use Office in one way or another, right? So that's the path they're going. I think they could have taken a much more aggressive stance, on what I call personal AI assistants, right? And be a player there. And it doesn't seem like they want to go down that path, right? So they're leaving that to other people. I think Apple is going to be a big player there, right? So
Yep.
Microsoft's still burned from Clippy.
Yeah, they're coming out with a new version of Clippy, by the way. I'm not sure they're going to call it Clippy, but presumably better, right? Yeah, and Apple would like a much smarter version of Siri. They're definitely going after that, and Amazon would like a much more powerful Alexa, and so on, right? So those could be kind of sort of like personal assistants, but it could go a lot further than that. So it's a pretty open playing field here with regard to that.
What I think you mentioned about Apple is the thing a lot of people are missing when they talk about Apple not innovating. If you look at the amount of power they're putting in their chips right now on their phones, and if you talk about pushing, inferencing out to the edge, and if you talk about, privacy and things like that, I'm still surprised that more people aren't talking about, what obvious play I think they're making in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that play out. Google's doing the same thing, by the way. I use a Pixel phone, and it has its version of TPU running in the phone, right? And they're obviously really quite aware now of the fact that people are going to want to run these models on their phone, right? So, and they're also going to have to solve the problem of if the query is too complex to roll over to a server somewhere and answer it that way. Data privacy issues are going to be a big thing, right? So because people aren't going to trust their personal AI assistants, if their personal information is shared, with other companies, right? So that has overtones on the whole Web3 architecture. Who owns the data and how's it monetized and so on, right? So Will, going back to you for a second, you're asking, what am I doing, and am I building a bunker and so on, right? So I've just, you have to put some stakes in the ground, right? So I think the next 2 years up to, through 2025, we're going to be relatively normal. We're going to see, big rollout of personal enablement, because we're going to use, these AI assistants more and more, right? So, and as Dan said, it's going to, people are going to be twice as productive, 10 times more productive in some cases, right? So, and so it's going to start having pretty significant economic impact, right? So in the physical world, it's going to be humanoid robots, right? So, there are several companies that are going full force on that. Tesla is one of them, right, with their Optimus robot. I don't know if you saw the latest video of their Optimus robot doing yoga, right? So, so they're and manually manipulating objects and so on, right? Tesla has said, or Elon Musk has said, that they expect their robots to be working in their factories sometime in 2024, right? So they're going to start having that impact on manufacturing, and then it's going to roll out. A robot worker in a factory is way cheaper than a person, right? So for certain tasks, right? So they can just operate 7/24, and they're going to be, they're going to cost. I mean, Elon Musk said $20,000, but he's always optimistic. But even if the things cost $100,000, they're going to be worth buying, right? Because they just continually work, right? So the AI will roll over into the physical world that way, and make an economic impact. Autonomous driving, I think, is going to be solved in 2024 to the extent where at least some routes, are going to be autonomous, right? And then it'll just increase, as the technology becomes more capable, right? So transportation of goods and people are going to become automated, to have a big impact on the economy as well, right? So, and then of course when AGI comes along and starts designing things, right? Starts doing scientific research and and just really starts having a huge economic impact, there's going to be a lot of turmoil, and there's going to be social turmoil as well, right? So we're going from where we are right now, to a relatively fun sort of, we all get empowered. Maybe there's disinflation, and maybe deflation. Maybe the deflation doesn't just completely screw up the economy, right? So it does break almost every financial model that's out there, by the way. So the Real Vision people here. Pretty much everything that Real Vision has put out, I think, is going to break in the next year or two, right? So, and the financial, things that happen financially in the past are no longer going to be reflected what happens in the future, right? So it's going to be interesting to invest in the environment, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity too. So we go from where we are today through the run to AGI. There are going to be really good investing opportunities. You're just going to have to pick them somehow, right? Because there's going to be some big winners in that space, right? So as we run up, right? I don't think the time window is very big. My window might be shorter than Dan's. I don't know. It's but we're not talking 10 years out anymore. We're talking 2-3 years out, to make money in that kind of investing, right? So, and then there's going to be social turmoil, right? It's not going to be evenly distributed, right? So, people are going to, not have jobs, right? So, is universal basic income going to roll out in any meaningful way? Probably somewhere along the way, right? So, so there's going to be a period of turmoil, which is, you need to prepare yourself for, I think, right? So at the end of it, assuming there's a good outcome, then we enter an age of abundance, right? So, and life could be really, quite awesome, right? So we have to get through that period of turmoil. So that's what you need to prepare for, preparing for abundance. I think we're going to transition as the human race into being more human, being more community oriented, so your physical location is going to be important, right? So where you live and the people you interact with, there's going to be online communities, obviously, right? So it's not clear anybody needs to work for economic benefit anymore, right? So but personal benefit for sure, right? So and we're still going to be human beings, so things like status and so on, social status is still going to be important somehow, right? So you have to kind of think through all that, right? So it's going to be a process. I think it's all going to be done, kind of by 2030, right? So that kind of transition period into whatever the human race is going to be after that.
So Gil, I mean, that's all, you can sort of see that pathway. It doesn't take many bad apples for this to really go wrong, though. I mean, I like your vision, the future of abundance, and that makes sense. But my concern is in the interim, AI applied to the war strategies of Russia versus Ukraine, and it just being this escalation of competition that could really end up in a really bad place. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And it's tough to control. I mean, there's a discussion about whether there should be constraints on AI development. I think if there are constraints, it's only the people that are willing to follow the rules that would be constrained, and you're still having bad players out there. So I think it's necessary to not have constraints on the people that will put this AI to positive use. But I mean, how concerned are you, Gil and Dan, about that?
Well, let me answer first, and then Dan, you can jump in, and anybody else can jump in too, right? So, like I said, there's going to be a period of turmoil, right? It's not going to be all sunshine and roses, right? So, like you said, there's going to be killer robots, or manipulations of economies, right? So there's going to be almost no regulation, even in the United States, because I listened to an interview by somebody who talks to a lot of people in Congress, right, about this stuff, right? So, and he says you can just bring any conversation about regulation to a complete halt by saying just one word, and that word is China. Yeah. Because China's not going to stop. In fact, AI, and AGI is just made for totalitarian governments, right? If you have an AI, an AGI, and it's already started, by the way. China has released, okayed, release of certain bots, right? So, to the population. I mean, those bots toe the party line, right? AI tutors in China are going to teach the party way, right? The right China way, and the kids are going to believe it, right? So. Mm-hmm. So there's that, right? So, and there's also the economic threat. Sam Altman from OpenAI, he's stopped saying this, by the way, but like 3 years ago, it's in interviews, he first of all, when they did the switch to being a for-profit company, right? So he actually very glibly said, he said, we're in a race for AGI. It's a winner take all, right? So, because once you have the first AGI, it can create the next version, the next version. No one can ever catch up with you. He said, whatever a company or country creates the first AGI, they will generate all the economic value from now until the end of time in the light cone of the universe or something like that. You made a really strong statement. It will all be owned by whoever creates the first AGI, because you only need one, right? So, and then nobody can catch up, right? So he also said in his pitch to raise $1 billion, that first $1 billion, he said, we don't worry about, our investors being paid off or us making money, because what we're going to do is we're going to create an AGI, and then we're simply going to ask it how to make money, right? So, so no worries, right? Because we're going to build machines that are way smarter than us, and they can tell us how to make money, right? So going back to the fundamental point, we are in for a bumpy ride, right? So, and we just have to hope for a good outcome at the end, this age of abundance, right? So it's not guaranteed we're going to get there, but if we do, I think it could be really great. I'm going to plan for being really great, because what are you going to do otherwise, right? So I just tell people arbitrarily, in conversations, that there's a 10% chance of a really bad outcome for humanity and a 90% chance it's going to be awesome, right? So, but that awesomeness is going to go through a path of extreme disruption, right? So, and you have to be prepared to somehow ride out that disruption, until humanity ends up where it's going to be, where superintelligence basically runs everything.
I mean, the scary thing right now is if you look at what's happening with the auto workers just over the protests around moving to electric vehicles. Can you imagine what's going to break out, once we start, making some of those transitions you're talking about right now and the changes to the workforce?
Yeah, it's kind of hard, kind of put your finger on, right? So I posed this question to this group and also to the Real Vision group. It's very hard to get traction on, thinking about it, but that's the 2x everything question. Let's say you could just like snap your fingers and suddenly everything is, 2 times easier to do, or it can be done at 1/2 the cost or whatever, right? So people become twice as productive. Robots enter the workforce, so production, goes 2x. Let's just say everything goes 2x overnight, right? So, just exactly what happens, right? So, what happens to GDP? Are people gonna, be worth twice as much or only 1/2, right? So, I mean, they're twice as effective, but maybe you only need, half the output. So I heard one commentator say, maybe we just start transitioning to shorter and shorter work weeks. Like go to 4 days and then 3 days, then 2 days, as everybody becomes more and more effective, right? So goods become cheaper. I'm with Dan, deflation is almost certain to happen in a massive way, so that's going to break a lot of things right there, right? So it's pretty hard to get a handle on exactly what's going to happen to the economy, right? So, or even to form models around the economy, right? So it's
Deflation's relatively easy to solve, and so I think we probably won't actually experience a sharp, painful deflation. Instead, we'll probably use that deflationary pressure as an excuse to increase M1 and maintain a relatively stable dollar during that run up. But it will be cover for low interest rate phenomenon for long periods of time and increase in the money supply. So that's part of it. I want to just come back to Will's question about risks. And Nick Bostrom wrote a book called Superintelligence, which I think was quite excellent at identifying some of the risks of AGI. But I think probably the larger risk is not related to an autonomous agent with its own goals. The larger risk is probably an AGI that's owned and controlled, whose goals are dictated by a bad actor. And I'm not envisioning a world where there's a single AGI that is sort of strictly dominant and running away with the future. I think about it more like the forest analogy before, where there's a large number of actors, state actors, corporate actors, individuals who own and control their own little AIs that are purpose driven. And these are all going to be interacting with the economy in quite a dynamic way, and it's a chaotic system that's hard to predict. It may be that evolves into a winner-take-all world where there's a single AI that sort of takes over everything, but I think that is actually a much longer prospect. I think AGI is already here. The technical timeline is very fast. I'm not sure that I would characterize that as taking years, but the social response to it, I think, will go slower than we're imagining here. That how the civilization will respond, that's likely to play out over, you know, multiple years, if not decades. Even after the technology is here, clear, obvious to us in these kinds of conversations, but not really touching the lives of you know, the majority of the billions of people on the planet, at least in a direct way, other than driving down costs and creating a world of abundant production, leaving the question of distribution aside.
Yeah, I think it's going to go faster, Dan, because I think AI is going to replace the economic value of humans, right? You know, that individuals, even around the world, right, even in Africa, are going to have their economic value stripped away, right? And so then what's left?
Right, but not all of it will happen immediately. A lot
No,
of the economy is not information based. There
no,
are people who are still agrarian economies. There are, you know, a wide variety of jobs like plumbers and electricians who have to know how to, you know, crawl under the house and fix this particular thing, and it's still quite integrated with physicality. And so, you know, the transition is just going to happen more slowly, even if the intelligence boom has already happened.
Well, this is where I see some of the disruption happen, and you saw some of it happen in the pandemic, or coming out of the pandemic, right? Good luck hiring a plumber for a while there, right? So they weren't available, right? You know, so as the disruption happens, it's not clear that plumbers are going to want to work. You know, it's and so there's just going to be this kind of cascading effect of things breaking, right? So
I think what we're actually seeing is just that deflation in the information world is built into our expectations about what things should cost. And in the physical world, where that deflationary pressure hasn't impacted us, we're seeing actually quite substantial inflation in services. And so if you want to hire a plumber, better be ready to pay him double, because they are not benefiting from the deflationary pressure that information services in the form of artificial intelligence and software in general are impacting other businesses. So, you know, it's not that there are, you know, fewer plumbers running around. It's that they require more pay, because we have had an economic system where there's deflation in many information oriented businesses and services, and quite strong inflation in the things that technology cannot yet drive down, where technology can't yet drive down the price.
What do you think the risk is of AI draining all of our assets? So one concern I have is, you know, the ability to crack passwords, and you know, this at some point I check in my account in Fidelity and it's zero.
I don't, just give me my 2 cents worth. People don't know, right? You know, one is quantum computing, right? So, that's a different way of computing, and certain things are going to break. Certain kinds of encryptions are going to break once quantum computing becomes real, right? So once we have super intelligence, I mean, who knows what that thing is going to create, right? So, quantum computing, might just be a first stepping stone, right? So I would just assume that all encryption breaks once there's a super intelligence, right? That everything that's ever been encrypted becomes readable to this machine, right? It's not going to care about your Fidelity account, though, right? So you have bigger things to worry about, like, what's the value of money, at all at that point, right?
There are a lot of bad actors out there. I look at your 90-10 number and think it's 1090. And it's not because the AGIs are going to run off and do something. It's as we said, there are just too many bad actors in the world who are going to use it for every bad purpose imaginable.
Yep.
They already are.
And and as we're going to get empowered, to become smarter, and do things economically faster and so on. You're right, Michael. The bad actors are going to be empowered too, right? So it's going to be messy.
I do think that, it's the most comparable moment in time is probably nuclear weapons. And I think, you look at some of the biggest players, the ones that are the doomsday scenario guys like Ahmad Mostak of Stability and Mustafa Suleiman of Inception. And concentration of power is like one of the biggest alarm bells they're ringing. And you look at any time in history where there's a massive concentration of power, there's power struggle. And I do think inevitably it'll lead to some form of global war. And like one would only hope that we could handle it as well as we did nuclear weaponry, right? I mean, there might be an AI equivalent of a Hiroshima first, but I think that's probably the closest comparison, at least listening to you guys talk about this, that I could draw.
The difference, Jed, between nuclear weapons, let's say, right, and AGI, or that kind of disruptive technology, is that it's actually hard to get the materials to build nuclear weapons. It's that's why there's only, I mean, how many countries have nuclear weapons? Like 5 or 6, right? So it's but that is not true of AI, right? So it's much easier to create AI systems than it is to create nuclear weapons.
But couldn't you compare like the amount of compute that it's going to take to truly reach AGI to like enriched uranium? Like not everybody can just get that amount of compute.
That's only true for foundation models, but once you have a pre-trained language model that is pre-trained, then you can run it with inference. And so the compute requirements go way down.
Yeah, and also if you look at the cost trends, even for foundation models, right? ARK Invest has done simulations on this, right? So tracking it, and their reports are available online. They did an analysis. No, this is of GPT-3, right? Which is 10 times smaller than GPT-4. But GPT-3 in its day, when OpenAI created it, they spent something like $15 million in computing costs to create it. If I remember the numbers right. ARK Invest thinks that based on the cost of computing trends by 2030, that equivalent computation is going to cost less than $100. But AI models are going to get more complicated too. So, maybe they get more complicated at the same rate that, that computing costs fall, right? So, GPT-4 is known to have cost more than $100 million to compute, right? So computing costs are going to fall, but, GPT-5, 6, 7, 8 might be just that much bigger. So it's a little bit unknown, right? So,
Dad, you take that, fear about AI and you look at its applicability to creating bioweapons. And now you have a whole nother area of large risk about, what will people be able to do literally in their garage?
That's very scary. Yeah,
it's very scary. We haven't even talked about what's happening in biotech and AI, right? So, I mean, there's huge amount of work being done in that area. A lot of startups, right? So doing drug discovery and so on, right? So, it's somebody from NASA. In fact, Rael Paul actually said this in an interview that he talked to somebody at Google X, their skunkworks projects, and they said that it is possible with today's technology to create a virus that targets very specific people. People like kill all people with blue eyes, right? He said that technology exists today, right? So you can only imagine what it's going to be like in a few years down the road, right? So biology is being blown wide open by AI, right? So the rate of understanding of what's happening biologically is there's an exponential increase in that knowledge, and people can take advantage of that, hopefully in good ways, to cure diseases and slow down aging and all those sorts of things. But there's a very big dark side of that as well.
Yeah, right. All the regulations in the world that pertain to AGI or foundational models, none of that can have any impact on a self-replicating biological system. So once you build one self-replicate, it's the gray goo philosophical question once again. Once you build a self-replicating biological system, then it just avoids your regulations by itself. There's really nothing that we can do at that point. It's an invasive alien species.
Now we're all depressed.
Well, yeah. So what's the investing strategy then? Is it a hole in the backyard?
That the robots can jump over?
Damn it! Okay, that doesn't work either.
Well, we did touch on the investment strategy. I think owning compute, owning the beginning stages of the data supply chain, owning end customer relationships, businesses that are going to take advantage of disintermediation rather than being hurt by it. Those are the major themes that you want to own on the run up. Gil, do you agree with that, or would you add nuance?
Dan and I see things a little bit differently, right? But I do think that there's going to be pretty significant investing opportunities in the run up to AGI, right? It's going to be tricky to figure out which ones, and I'm talking about public equities, right? Because you need to be able to get out of them at the right time. So I'm completely not in Dan's camp on doing private equity at this point, right? So because I just don't think there's time, right? So but it's a no-brainer, investments, and then more speculative. It's worthwhile talking about and thinking about a portfolio of equities that are going to do 2x, 3x over the next couple of years, right? So Tesla, I think, is one of them. NVIDIA might be, but again, NVIDIA plays in foundation models. There's a whole inference side, right? So and computing on the edge, there's going to be investing opportunities there, and so on, right?
You could also play the flip side of this. If we're talking about, people going to 3-4 day work weeks and all this free time, is leisure travel something to be investing in? Which is, what are the ripple effects and implications? Are people going to have a lot of time to travel?
That's why I'm buying video game companies. What are people going to do with their time? There's going to be a lot of cognitive surplus.
Dan's probably right on that, right? You can already see that trend, right? And Zuckerberg and Meta tried to capitalize on that maybe too soon, right? With the metaverse effort, which has pretty much come to a standstill now because AI has clobbered it. But eventually, people are gonna be spending time that way.
I think another way to think about it too is, if you want to follow the DeepMind mafia, the players here, it's interesting. One of the reasons why Gil asked me to join the call, I'm actually interviewing across this divide right now. For context, I'm an executive recruiter. I started in the quantitative trading space, and then for the past 4 years, I've been on the executive pipeline at Meta Platforms, and specifically, one of my focus areas is AI. And I'm actively interviewing right now. I'm not going to tell you exactly where, but one category is along, what I would call the outside our bodies AI companies, and then the other side would be the inside our bodies, right? The bioscience firms. And if you look across the landscape, a lot of this, I didn't know this going into it, but I quickly discovered it when I did my market mapping. Is like the DeepMind mafia is split across both, right? You have the co-founders like Demis Hassabis, who's over at Isomorphic, owned by Alphabet, trying to solve the longevity problems, right? Curing cancer and just longevity in general. And then you have Mustafa, who's over at Inflection, building consumer products and probably racing towards AI along with OpenAI. But I think bioscience is a real high risk bet still. The failure rate over there is 95%. Something else I learned while doing R&D for the space is they have this saying, it's a Room's law, which is Moore's law backwards. Everything just keeps getting more expensive and the failure rate goes up. But it is interesting to see that, the biggest players, the DeepMind mafia and everybody involved is splintering across these two sides, because what we haven't talked about is you know, the big piece of singularity is like, will we solve mortality, right? Like everyone in this room, the common thread between all of us, we're all probably all different ages, we all have different net worths, but we're all marching towards death, right? Regardless of what we're going to do on the outside with AGI. So it'll be curious and interesting to see like where you can invest on that front. But it's definitely, as far as I can tell so far, still very high risk, near term and long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's the possibility that AI will, you know, wipe human race, you know, off the planet. But I'm always wondering what happens when no one dies.
Exactly.
We're going to need that age of abundance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also there's Mars. You know, I understand they have an underpopulation problem there. So
I got to run. Thanks, everyone. Really interesting.
yeah, why don't we wrap it up? Dan and I might do this, every couple of months, because whatever we're talking about now is going to be wiped out in a couple of months by new information. So that's
It'll be your avatar running it next time. We just won't know.
yeah. We're gonna
Could be
invite
this time. You wouldn't know.
All right, take care,
Great,
everyone.
That was great. Thank you so much both for putting it on. It's very helpful. I appreciate the context. Thanks.
Take care all.
It's brilliant. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Bye now.